Good morning, good afternoon, good day. Thank you to all participants for joining. We'll just give 1 or 2 more minutes as the participants are joining the call, and we will be starting in very, very soon. Okay, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good day again. Welcome to the online Stakeholders Thematic Debate, which is organized in preparation for the United Nations High-Level Dialogue on Energy. This event is convened by DESA in collaboration with UN Energy. This webinar is part of a series of activities that we have been organizing in the lead up to the high-level debate on energy to collect inputs and to support the participation and engagement of the stakeholders from different sectors in the preparation for the high-level debate. A summary of this webinar will be prepared by our colleagues from IISD. All information, including the recording of the event, will be published to the high-level dialogue website, and we'll be making everything available to member states, to all partners, to all stakeholders as we go advance further. So everything that is shared today, all the links, all those who also have registered will be receiving the information as well. My name is Nayara Costa. I'm a Senior Sustainable Development Officer at the Division for Sustainable Development Goals at DESA. I am honored to facilitate this session. Before we begin, I just would like to provide some housekeeping announcements. As I mentioned, this call will be recorded. The link will be shared with all those who registered, as well as posted on our website. We are encouraging all participants to use the chat and Q&A boxes to make comments throughout the session. We have a very packed program today, and we really want to create opportunities for interaction through the chat box. We will be monitoring the chat box. We will try to accommodate some inputs during the webinar, but also we'll be compiling those inputs as well for our review and as part of the summary as well. We are also inviting our panelists to interact with you through the chat box as well. If you are on social media, if you're tweeting, you can use the hashtag HLDE 2021, and you can also tag our account at SustDev. So let's start with some opening remarks. And it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Minoru Takada, the Energy Team Leader and DESA representative at the High-Level Dialogue Secretariat, to provide opening remarks. Minoru, please, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naira. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, probably, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to meet you in this way to talk about energy agenda. We have 2 big goals in the world, right? One, sustainable development goal that we are all committed to be making sure that to be realized by 2030. Second, Paris Agreement on climate change. We must protect the planet. So we must keep the temperature below 1.5 degrees pre-industrial levels, and we have to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. As you can see, energy sits right in the middle. So that is why General Assembly at the United Nations decided to convene a global gathering called High-Level Dialogue Energy this year in the margin of General Assembly in September. This is the first time GA is convening a global gathering on energy since 1981. You might remember 1981 was just after the oil crisis. We are in the middle of a crisis, probably multiple crises, COVID-19 of course, but SDGs are not on track. But also, the world is on a dangerous trajectory going into the 3 degrees plus pathway. So we really have to change the way that we approach energy agenda. That is why we are excited to have you here on board to talk about this energy agenda and then have established throughout, support the technical working groups that are supporting the high-level dialogue energy preparations. So today we're going to hear from them as to where they stand on the key recommendations coming out of the technical working group on the 5 themes that Naira just showed you, and also listen to you, your recommendation, your perspective, and your suggestion as to how we actually bring solutions to this problem. It is clear that to act on energy agenda, we have to have all people working together. So this is central issue is going to be multi-stakeholder partnerships. So you as multi-stakeholders coming from businesses, civil societies, of course, from the governments as well, are really, really important. And we look forward to having your suggestions coming together. Lastly, we're going to have a Ministerial Thematic Forum coming up between 21st and 25th of June. This is a sort of most important milestone toward the high-level dialogue, and it's to be held in September. So we hope that you'll be able to join this virtual Ministerial Thematic Forum. Registration is open. Side events are widely open for you to register. And most importantly, I invite you to bring your action called Energy Compacts. So you'll be able to launch your Energy Compact during the Ministerial Thematic Forum. With this small introduction, I'll hand it back over to you. And we look forward to having a very productive discussion today. Thank you very much. Naira, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minoru, for joining us today and also for really flagging the historical moment that we have to prepare this high-level debate next September. So before we dive into our discussion, I would like to announce the publication of a summary report of the Stakeholders Thematic E-Consultation for the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy. We opened this E-Consultation between April and May. It was open and available to all interested stakeholders. And the focus was in compiling inputs on the 5 themes of the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy and the themes that we will be discussing today. So we are very grateful to all the stakeholders. We received 85 inputs from stakeholders on the different themes, very solid, very concrete recommendations, and the summary report reflects some of those key messages. You can read the report at the link that we are sharing now in the chat. And then today's event is also a follow-up of the e-consultation of the summary report, and also an opportunity to consolidate and reinforce some of those messages that stakeholders are bringing to the high-level dialogue on energy. We shall now then start with our first theme, energy access. So we will have 5 sessions, 1 per overarching theme of the high-level dialogue on energy. And for each session, we will be starting with some remarks from a co-lead of the technical working group for the high-level dialogue. And then we will have colleagues from the different sectors from the stakeholder community to provide their inputs. Let me start to give the floor to Mr. Stephen Holloway, who serves as Senior Advisor at the World Bank. Mr. Holloway, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
I can't see myself, but I hope you can see me. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present some general comments on what the working group has been doing. First, I'd like to thank the Secretariat, Emmanuel and his team, as well as the co-leads for the report UNDP and UNOHR-LLS for their advice and guidance, as well as the timely support of our country champions. A little bit of background. There were constraints on both a tight timeline we are producing this report in slightly over 100 days in a format with a highly structured template of 10 to 12,000 words, which of course we went over a bit. The working group was composed of over 400 persons from a wide range of stakeholders. Our meetings were attended by 80 to 100 persons. The members provided substantive comments in this process. Given the limited time we have this morning, I'd like to share with you some of the overarching themes which we have been discussing. We are looking at priority results supported by corresponding what we call building blocks. Implementation will require synergies with other SDGs supported through a set of interlinked actions. 4 major areas. Reinforce enabling policy and regulatory frameworks to attract investment. Enhance socioeconomic inclusiveness of energy access. Catalyze, harness, and redirect energy access financing, and align costs, reliability, quality, and affordability of energy services. Here are some of the top line areas that we have been looking at. Aligning energy policy and investment with energy transition pathways that accomplish universal access to electricity and clean cooking by 2030. Prioritize and coordinate political commitments and financing into accelerated access to clean cooking, building synergies with electrification efforts. Position universal access to energy as a key enabler and driver of inclusive, sustainable, and resilient economic recovery and growth, and as an integral part of the transition to a just net zero emissions energy system. Energy access planning must be fully integrated with broader development priorities to achieve unprecedented synergies and possibilities with respect to all other SDGs. Putting people at the center of efforts to deliver universal energy. Both clean cooking and electricity access initiatives must be designed based on human needs, user practices and preferences, and consumer affordability levels in diverse national and local cultural and socioeconomic contexts. Communities should be seen not only as beneficiaries, but also as co-creators of future energy systems. The last mile of energy access must become the first mile. Lack of access to clean cooking and electricity disproportionately affects low-income and vulnerable populations and women and girls. Supporting enterprises with innovative, cost-effective, and scalable energy access business models and accelerating the delivery of clean cooking and electricity solutions to households, businesses, and community facilities. The private sector can play a key role in driving energy access, particularly for poor and rural communities. Accelerating the advancement of knowledge exchange, capacity building, partnership building, and innovation. Human capital will be essential to drive universal access to energy. Governments, development partners, and service providers should support local academic and training institutions by investing in capacity and skill building for all levels of participants in sustainable energy access efforts, from policymakers to technicians, as well as promoting local entrepreneurship while targeting particularly women and youth. And improving the availability and quality of open source, verifiable energy information and data pertinent to national, subnational, and local contexts. These are some of the themes that we have been discussing in the working group. Again, let me thank all of you who have provided insights and comments to the working group process. I look forward to hearing your interventions and looking at your chats. As most of us, unfortunately, I have 3 competing events, and I'll stay with you as long as I can. With that, back to you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holloway, for sharing the key messages from the technical working group. And I'm sure our colleagues, the stakeholders that will be coming through now, they will also able to reflect on what you have also shared. And thank you for staying for us as long as you are able to. I really understand the competing priorities. So let's start with our panel now, and focusing on the discussion on energy access. So I kindly ask our panelists to keep their interventions to the 3 minutes limit. You are now seeing the guiding questions for the sessions displayed on the screen. And I'll start with our first speaker, Mr. Sunil Dhingra, Senior Fellow and Associate Director at the Energy and Resources Institute. Mr. Dhingra, you have the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much giving me the opportunity to for this event to talk about energy access challenge and gaps, and also the way forward. I thanks UN Energy team for organizing this high-level meeting on energy access. So let me, before coming to these key questions which are we have to reflect on, let me share my what progress India has made on electrification of household, and also the provision of LPG in rural homes as a clean energy solution. There are about 80 million household which has been connected with LPG connection, which is a major milestone towards meeting this SDG goal, providing universal access to modern energy sources to the large population. Both access to electricity and clean energy solution, cooking energy, definitely has positive impact on the quality of the life of the people, and also the human development, particularly in the rural areas, which are deprived from clean energy solution, the availability, and those scenarios. So let me now focus on what are the key challenges, way forward is there. So if one look at from the electricity access point of view, the degree of electricity availability varies from region to region, state to state, typically. And what we have seen is that though access through grid infrastructure has been provided, but availability is something around 12 to 16 hours a day, and that too, the quality and the reliability of power is a critical challenge. Particularly, I would say, on the remote and the tail end of the grid, where the infrastructure is quite weak, and people dependence on electricity is a challenge. The second important challenge is the affordability and willingness to pay, which remain an important challenge, particularly in the low income family groups, where there is no where there is a not regular income, but they have to pay for these services on a monthly basis. And also very important is the use of LPG, which is a quite expensive option, while initial connection has been given on a concessional basis, but refilling is the critical challenge as a clean cooking solution, ensuring that household do not revert back to non-electricity scenario, particularly in the low income household. So this is the second important challenge, which is one has to ensure. The third important gap or challenge is basically, while basic electricity supply, basically for household lighting and some lifestyle use, is being provided through this electricity access, but electricity for economic and productive application is largely unaddressed. And we believe that without achieving this goal, the people will not able to, particularly in the remote and economical backward region, will not able to pay for these services where their income is quite low and largely on agriculture or some forest related income is there. So I think the third important factor is that how we can support energy access for this productive and I would say livestock kind of a requirement. When we come to
sorry, Mr. Dingra. Sorry, I'll have to ask you to wrap up, please.
Okay. So let me just conclude that there are the three broad future way forward is there. One is to ensure reliable 24/7 electricity along this connection, which is critical. The second important thing is looking at some flexibility in payment pattern and also the smart metering, e-pay meter kind of a thing. Now, as we see that India has largest program on renewable energy which has been implemented. The solar and wind energy is quite cheap and very low compared to conventional. So I think the long-term electrification of cooking energy is the way forward, where electricity availability 24/7 and long-term electrification of cooking energy one has to attempt. The last point which I would like to, before I wrap up, is basically one has to develop electrification solution that combine grid electricity and with decentralized solution with some storage technologies so that we can take benefit of renewable energy development which is happening and achieve this universal access goal of the country. Thank you very much. Here I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Dingra, for sharing your expertise and for also flagging those important recommendations and ways forward. I will now introduce Miss Catherine Joyce. She's a PhD candidate in the Center for Renewable Energy and Research Institute for Environment and Livelihoods at Charles Darwin University. Ms. Joyce, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and hello, everybody. I'm going to speak directly today about off-grid energy access based on my research that I'm conducting. So three of the challenges that I've identified are demonstrating the viability of off-grid energy systems to provide sufficient energy in the long term and meet communities' needs, diverse needs. The second challenge is to engage people with robust community energy planning models. And the third challenge is to establish service and maintenance and waste management regimes for long-term sustainability. Some of the measures to address these three challenges by building systems of energy governance, profiling off-grid demonstration communities of varying climate situations, nations, and of varying sizes, building local networks of off-grid energy professionals, and using those networks to build national, regional, and local knowledge in off-grid energy access. Secondly, the second measure is identifying best practice community energy planning models that are participatory and flexible and adaptive for local livelihoods and local contexts, and that take account of communities' energy goals and aspirations. Thirdly, identifying best practice service maintenance and waste management systems that are adaptable to local contexts. For example, taking into account transport systems that overlap and that will enable or constrain these types of services particularly for extremely remote communities. And also climate extremes and variations also need to be considered in that. But one of the most important aspects of service and maintenance is building community capacity and skill to take ownership of some of those services, and in this way, taking ownership of systems and local systems. So I think it's important to recognise energy governance as a dynamic system which adapts over time, not just to current energy needs, but to future aspirations of communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Joyce, and for bringing this perspective of inclusive approaches and empowering communities, which is really important. Let me now invite our third speaker of this session, Mr. Adekoye Kuya. Kuya, apologies for my mispronunciation of your name. And he is the project lead at the Manamus Electric Limited. Mr. Kuya, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on this awesome program. So I think I'll just go directly to the point. One of the major challenges I think we're facing in achieving SDG 7 and energy access target is, number one, is financing. I don't think there is much we can do without proper financing. I think funds are not getting to where they're needed the most. I also think we do not fund clean energy startups in emerging economies enough. For example, in Africa, I've noticed that African investors and banks do not fund clean energy startups well enough. For instance, in my organization, most of the funds we've raised over the years are from overseas, mostly from Europe or from the United States. So there's always this scare that their ideas are not proven. But how do you prove an idea without getting funding opportunities? So I think we need to fund African startups to get energy access. Without strong investments, commitments, we cannot achieve the goals of the SDG 7. Another challenge is the rural-urban migration. We have more people moving to urban centers, thereby making rural communities less attractive to investment. Investors don't want to invest in projects they feel are not economically viable or financially sustainable. So we need to check that area of the high influx to urban centers. Going forward, looking at the solution and policies to address these challenges, I think firstly, we need stronger investments in rural and underserved communities. We need to invest strongly in rural communities. Also, I think we need to invest in young people's ideas and innovations. For example, in my organization, which is very much youth-driven, we are always coming up with these great ideas and awesome innovations, but there are no funds to pursue these innovations. So I think we need to invest in young people, and we need to invest in clean energy startups in emerging economies. Also, I think we need to streamline excessive administrative procedures to make it less complicated for organizations to get access to funding opportunities to deploy clean energy projects in their communities. And also, thirdly, we need to focus more on productive use of energy. What do I mean by this? For example, the project we are currently working on in my organization, which is deploying solar-powered cold chain infrastructure for smallholder farmers in rural communities, where farmers get to store their farm produce in our cold stores to prevent post-harvest losses. And also, we also help them to connect. We also connect them to off-takers and the high-value market. So this way, they're making profits, they're making income, and they're generating revenues for themselves to take care of their families. So I think we need to focus more on productive use of energy. I think this way, clean energy projects can be self-sustaining even after investment periods. And finally, I think we need to carry everyone along. We need to carry along private organizations, government agencies, and other stakeholders. And everyone needs to work together to achieve SDG 7 energy access targets. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuya. Very important messages, including on the role of youth and this need of bringing everybody together in supporting energy access. I'm really thankful for all our panelists and for all the comments on the energy access theme. Just another reminder that we are compiling the questions. There will be a summary of the discussion. You can also see some of the key messages from the E-Consultation as well. I just want to, break a little bit on our agenda, and I'll give 15 seconds for if my panelists from the previous, and perhaps, I don't know, Mr. Holloway, if you're still there, if you have 15 seconds of, and to our panelists, what would be, if you have to pick one message you would like to hear in September at the high-level dialogue on energy, what would that be, that one message? I know that's super challenging, but Mr. Holloway, if you allow me to start with you, and then I'll go with the other colleagues.
One message. I think the one message is that access to electricity and clean cooking are on par, and we need to hammer that home. And this report, for the first time, places clean cooking in its proper position, and we need to move forward on that. If there was one very, very high road message. But I want to point out that the panelists have raised a number of the issues which we have discussed within the working group. The financing issues, of course, are critical. Working Group 5, you may hear later how they've approached this, and they've done it very methodically. But that's how we never take 15 seconds, so that would be it. And again, I apologize for having to jump for another high-level dialogue program, but I'm going to stay for the next presentation. Since it's coming from Asia, and I want to respect the fact that our colleague is up late in the evening. But again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Holloway. So I'll give 15 seconds to my previous panelists. Mr. Dhingra, what would be the key message you would like to hear?
I would vouch for long-term electrification of the cooking energy. As electricity access is being there and decarbonization of electricity sector is in progress, availability is being ensured by 24/7. So that is where I will pitch on that long-term electrification of the cooking energy should be the focus going forward. So with one source of energy, rural homes can ensure both electrification and clean cooking energy. So that will be my take on the message.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dhingra. Ms. Joyce?
I would hope that there would be recognition of the extreme challenges for remote and rural energy, any establishment of energy and energy access, including clean cooking.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kuya, Ms. Joyce. Mr. Kuya, over to you now. 15 seconds, your key message.
My key message will be to for us to invest in young people, and we need to invest in clean energy startups. Like, young people have a lot of amazing ideas, so we need to invest in young people for them to implement their awesome ideas. So that will be my key message.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuya, and to all our panelists. We shall now move then to our second theme, energy transition. And it is my honor to invite one of the co-leads of the Technical Working Group on Energy Transition, Mr. Hongpeng Liu. He's Director of Energy Division at UN ESCAP, and I really want to recognize and thank you so much for being with us, considering the time difference. Mr. Liu, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costa. And thanks for this opportunity. It's a great pleasure to have to join you this online technical dialogue with the stakeholders on behalf of the co-lead, IRENA, UNEP, and the ESCAP for the technical working group on energy transition. So the main work from this group is the development of a report on energy transition to support the preparatory process towards the high-level dialogue on energy in September. So the technical working group members provided a very comprehensive input and also consultations, a few meetings, and led very good foundations to finalize the report. So we also benefit from the global champions from this theme, including Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Denmark, Germany, India, Nigeria, Spain, and the United Kingdom for their continued support and valuable contributions to the outcomes of this theme, technical working group. So taking this opportunity, I will just quickly brief you about the key points we have in the report. And the first one is the major transformation of energy sector is required to address the challenges, which I think the previous group also mentioned, like energy access, the greenhouse gas emission reduction, energy system resilience, and also to achieve the most important 2030 agenda for sustainable development and the Paris Agreement, as well as the ultimate goal, the net zero by middle of the century. Secondly, a transformation of energy sector offers opportunities for sustained economic growth, social inclusion, energy security, and to improve health, job creation, and also other social benefits. The third one is energy transition is happening and being expanded and scaled up rapidly in recent years. And number four is enhanced international and regional cooperation is essential to facilitate the sharing of experiences and access to clean energy research and technology, and also the integration of power market and investment, especially at the regional level for integration of energy infrastructures. South-South cooperation can play a very significant role, especially in the exchange of good experiences and the best practices. And the last one, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a large impact, especially short-term impact on energy transition. But however, it provides opportunities from the physical stimulus package that many countries have launched or are putting in place to building back better and investing in low carbon policies and programs with significant positive benefits, and also for employment and the environment. Of course, we also have the policy recommendations in this report. There are 11 policy recommendations. I have no time to go through all the 11 recommendations, but I will just pick up a few. And the first one is exactly to rapidly scale up deployment of renewable energy. And we put the target there, 800 gigawatt renewables by 2030. This is also based on the IRENA report. And secondly, the average annual rate of energy efficiency improvement should be increased from the current 0.8% to 3%. And the third one is the investment in physical infrastructure should enable the energy transition. And the last, we also think the most important is the phase out of coal and ultimately about the fossil fuels. That's also give a very clear target. And even SG called the OECD countries phase out of coal by 2030, non-OECD by 2040. So I really think these are the policy recommendations we share with the member countries and also bring this to the consideration of the high-level dialogue. And the report will launch in the Ministerial Forum on Energy Transition in June. I believe the policy recommendations that is also ready to be brought to the high-level dialogue. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Leo, for joining us and for advancing some of the recommendations of the technical working group. And I'm sure our panelists will also be able to reflect on some of the messages you brought. Let me then start inviting our panelists for this session. And I'll start with Ms. Paola Simonetti. She's Deputy Director of the Economic and Social Policy Department at the International Trade Union Confederation. Ms. Simonetti, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nayara. Thank you very much. Good morning or afternoon to everybody. And thanks to Mr. Liu for his interesting summary, which we actually appreciate very much. We have actually highlighted, and I'm speaking on behalf of the ITUC, which represent 200 million workers in 163 countries. For workers, the main challenges are basically three. The first one is financial, as the colleague has already spoken in the previous group. The second one is on policy making, which kind of priorities should be followed. And the third one is related to governance, so how to implement those policies. So the financial challenge is very much, unfortunately, stringent today, because we know that economic incentives do not reflect the urgency to make the transformation to a low carbon society. We know that most stimulus for recovery, if we look at the G20 countries, have been directed in support of fossil fuel dependent industries, mostly with no requirements to promote sustainability. So what trade unions demand, it's really investment in climate friendly jobs. This is the way forward. This is what both SDG 7 and SDG 8 on decent work and employment and economic growth are telling us. IRENA has estimated that the renewable energy could employ millions of people by 2050, and also improving energy efficiency, as it was mentioned, to provide significant opportunities also for rapid job creation. When we look at the second challenge, so the policy making, we of course cannot ignore that the impact of the energy transition of workers, where actually the 32% of the energy sector workforce are women, is massive and will be massive. So while economic transformation to a clean and renewable energy is of course an imperative, this cannot happen to the detriment of workers' future. So workers call for adopting a just transition agenda, which is, in our view, the basis to underpin industrial transformation. So sustainable strategies should be shaped by linking energy policies to employment, to labor market policies, and decent work. So this means concretely industrial policies prioritizing key sectors to be targeted, social protection, income support for reskilling and redeployment support of workers, leverage local capabilities, entrepreneurship development, that it was mentioned by the colleague, and especially for women and youth, and then of course addressing the energy access challenges. But how to do that? And this is the third challenge. So the governance. There is a lack of democratic ownership and control on transition processes nowadays. So affected communities are too often ignored and workers are not given the right space and the voice. So here we call on governments to provide institutional frameworks. Industrial transformation cannot happen without workers. So the inclusion of workers, employers, and communities should be at the heart of any just transition processes. According to the ITUC assessment of the 79 national determined contributions plans submitted by today, only 8% have just transition plans and only 13% use social dialogue. So this is a trend that needs to be reversed. So national just transition plans involving governments, employers, workers, and other stakeholders are key to manage the end of fossil fuel dependency and also to guarantee the access to affordable clean energy to all sectors in the society in line with global commitments. So let me conclude by actually recalling the UN Secretary General statement regarding the new social contract, which needs to be based on inclusivity and sustainability. Well, climate-friendly jobs with just transition are part and parcels of the workers' demand for a new social contract, which of course has to go hand in hand and to be rooted in the fulfillment of labor rights, equality, and an inclusive development model for all. I stop here. Thank you, Nayara.
Thank you so much, Paula, for bringing the perspective of workers and for very concrete recommendations. May I move to our second panelist of this session, Ms. Aileen Mairena Coninha. She is Advocacy Officer at the Centro para la Autonomía y Desarrollo de los Pueblos Indígenas, and who will be sharing some perspectives also from indigenous peoples. Ms. Mairena, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Naira. Thank you also for giving the opportunity to bring the voices of the indigenous people in this important event. I'm speaking on behalf of the Indigenous People Major Group and the Renewable Energy Partnership with Indigenous People. The world indigenous people estimate at 6.2, but 50% of the global poor. 70% of the indigenous people live in rural areas in which the majority don't have access to energy and other social service. However, we have seen that many of these projects, energy projects, such large dams, geothermal plants, windmill, and solar farm, are being developed in our lands and resources without our consent. This imposition have resulted in conflict, forces displacement, destruction of livelihood, and sacred sites, and undermine our rights, such as in Mexico, Brazil, Paraguay, Honduras, Chile, Kenya, Indonesia, Philippines. So indigenous people really fully support the just transition to renewable energy. But we think it's essential to ensure that renewable energy development will respect and protect the rights of indigenous people and adhere to social equity. These needed actions are in line with the pledge of leaving no one behind and advancing Goal 7, which is also linked to achieving other SDGs. The IPMG has therefore initiated the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous people, and that is a multi-stakeholder platform led by Indigenous people to ensure inclusion of Indigenous people in achieving Goal 7, while advancing equity and empowerment of Indigenous women. We therefore call state, the private sector, and development actor to actively support the Right Energy Partnership with the following principles and action in the development of renewable energy. 1, adhering to international standards and laws on human rights and indigenous people rights, especially the ILO 169 Convention, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and the UN Guide Principles on Business and Human Rights. Provide funding mechanisms for community-based renewable energy to support health and education facility and sustainable livelihood of indigenous people. 3rd, provide assistance to strengthen indigenous people capacity and empowerment of indigenous women to pursue sustainable development, particularly in relation to access to renewable energy technologies. And strengthen knowledge sharing, solidarity, collaboration, and partnership between indigenous people and other actors in advancing Goal 7 and interlinked SDGs. Indigenous people as right holders and development actors are offering resolution to advance sustainable development. The Right Energy Partnership provides the opportunity and platform to for a constructive engagement and partnership with states, the private sector, civil society organizations, UN agencies, and other development actors to work together to ensure that those left behind are empowered and given central role in advancing the just transition and sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Mairena. This is a really incredible contribution and very important points indeed. Our next panelist is a young advocate. So it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Vince Davidson Pacanyot, member and advocate at the 2030 Youth Force for the SDG in the Philippines. Mr. Pacanyot, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nayara. A pleasant day to all the participants in this important virtual gathering, especially to the members of the youth sector. Allow me to deliver my intervention for the energy transition theme of the upcoming high-level dialogue on energy. In our attempt to embrace cleaner and more sustainable energy for all, we must first recognize and address the challenges that prevent us from fulfilling such an important target. Let me mention some challenges that merit urgent action to advance our energy transition agenda. First, the continuous dependence of countries to fossil fuels for their energy needs by enforcing policies and schemes such as subsidies and other forms of incentivization that favor the development of dirty fuel projects. Next, the insufficient additional capacities of clean and sustainable energy of countries due to lack of technology, infrastructure, and policy schemes. And lastly, the short-sightedness of countries and institutions to the benefits of energy efficiency and conservation measures in mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. To address these challenges, I submit the following recommendations. First, governments must immediately phase out fossil fuels in their respective energy mixes and replace them with cleaner and renewable energy sources that are cheaper and more flexible. Such would help achieve the short-term target of 45% emissions reductions by 2030 to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement as prescribed by the IPCC in its 2018 special report. Next, off-grid or far-flung communities must be prioritized in the energy transition by providing them cleaner, reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy sources following the no one left behind and furthest behind first principles of the 2030 UN SDGs. And finally, policy incentives must be directed not only for renewable power generation projects, but also for clean and green transportation measures and energy efficient or green buildings. To cap off my intervention, allow me to leave you with these words. Energy transition is not a mere social media trend. It is our planet's primary life-saving tool against the dangers of climate change. And as youth, we have the very right to be at the front lines of the energy transition agenda, just like everyone else, either by means of climate activism, research and technology, and social media campaigns promote cleaner and more sustainable alternatives to fossil fuels. Remember, in saving our beloved planet, every effort counts. Thank you for the opportunity to intervene.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pequeñot, for your very concrete recommendations. So before we go to our next panel, I'll do the round again on the 15 seconds. And if Mr. Liu is still with us, I know, sir, you mentioned there's so many recommendations coming from the working group, but if there is one that you would like to see mentioned during the high-level dialogue, in 15 seconds, which one would you like to recommend? And I'll come back to our panelists as well.
Thank you. Actually, in the chat box, I saw there's a link already shared with about our paper. So that means you can see easily all these 11 recommendations. But I think the most important message I want to share is that, the energy transition should be a participatory process. And also the question now is how to implement the transition. Because the fact that just energy transition is taking place, it's not a question, but the question is how to accelerate this transition. And also to make it a just transition. I think the panelists made a very important point for just transition. That's exactly the policy recommendation we include. Also to support this kind of recommendation in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liu, for those final thoughts as well. Paula, your 15 second
Yes,
suggestion.
I think that Mr. Liu has already said what I would say. Indeed, and thank you for picking up. I would like really to see the just transition and the government adopting just transition measures to grant the inclusivity of the industrial transformation processes. And just transition measures for us means be based on the social partners and communities inclusion. And this would mean also, and of course, the creation of climate-friendly jobs, which are really the synthesis between SDG 7 and SDG 8. I don't want to speak by numbers, but numbers mean policy, means policy. So in that sense, I would like really to see these messages at the high-level meeting in September. Thanks.
Thank you so very much, Paula. And Ms. Mariana.
Thank you. I really think it's important, the participatory issues, as Mr. Liu and Paula already say. But we think that it's very important that all this investment in the just transition should go to the communities directly, and that the community have the opportunity to lead this process. And it's not only the community with the inclusion of women, of youth, indigenous people, and other actors at local level. And we think it's very important to add this, all due respect to the human rights issues and the indigenous people rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mariana. Vince?
Yes. So I keep on emphasizing this to my other classmates and other friends, and I would like to re-emphasize this, that the best time for energy transition is now. And all the efforts for accelerating renewable energy development to every nation are needed, both from public and private sectors. And most especially, energy transition is for all. So this online stakeholder consultation is actually a good platform for that concept of energy transition for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for all our panelists on the second theme. Considering the time, we are going to rush a little bit, and we're going to move to our third theme, enabling SDGs to inclusive, just energy transitions. And so let me now give the floor to the co-lead, or one of the co-leads of the technical working group, Ms. Radia Sedawi, Chief of Energy Section at the Climate Change and Natural Resources Sustainability Cluster from UN ESPA. Ms. Sedawi, the floor is yours. I don't think we can hear you. No. There was, we started to hear, but then it stopped. No, not yet. Yeah, your mic is open, but it's not coming through. I think perhaps I don't know if you try to, yeah, now.
Can you hear me now?
Now we
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. This is when you change the technology, and I think this is part of our work for enabling the just transition. I would like first, similar to, for the sake of time, to thank the Secretariat for engaging this stakeholder meeting, and I would like also to highlight the excellent collaboration we had in the Technical Working Group 3 in enabling the just transition. Where we had the UN DESA, the WHO, and UN ESCWA, which is one of the regional commission of the UN system. We led the coordination of this reports, which I believe it's also online now. And I just want to highlight that we are thankful to really the members of the technical working group, where we had excellent input and feedback from the champions, but also from different stakeholders, from academia, youth, gender organization, but also others, because the difference in this working group basically we address the multidimensional of the SDGs and not just looking to how we achieve the SDG 7 and the energy transition, but how really we make it an integrated approach, not only from the social and the environment, but also make it in a way how to improve the synergies between the SDGs and have the win-win together, but at the same time address the trade-offs that we have certainly, whether from natural resource management or in the way and the pathway towards sustainable transition. Just in brief, our work, it's led to look at, as I indicated by previous speakers, it's certainly just transition, but not only for the people. It's for the people, the planet, and the prosperity for all, with focus on our future generation. Specifically, if we speak with the target 2050, so those who are not born yet and are not already taking decision and deciding on the design of the policies that will define also their future. I'm glad that we have youth represented today. So the just and inclusive energy transformation in brief, and the way that we address it in key thematic, I would say, recommendations that countries need to select depending on the pathway they are pursuing, depending on the national context and their natural resources, and more importantly, depending where they stand. Some of them are already in the pathway of energy transitions, and some others are left behind. Whether talking about communities, some marginalized groups, but also talking from a gender perspective, women versus men, but also youth, children, and people on disabilities, the LDCs and SEEDs, and you name others. So our focus is to look at inclusive energy transformation that holds opportunities for improving the health, well-being for our post population, empowering women, stimulate economic growth, and providing decent jobs, preserving the planet and its resources. And the challenges span certainly, as highlighted by other speakers, on the financial, regulatory policy, but we see them most importantly from the synergies and trade-off and the challenge that we face in addressing that. So our priority actions and the highlighters, I just want to highlight the most, I would say, that's work for all, specifically that we need to implement a sustainable energy transition strategy with social equity, inclusiveness at its center to enable the SDGs. It's to focus this transition, empowering people by ensuring gender equality in its and equity in its multiple dimensions, protecting the planet by ensuring a pathway to net zero emission and sustainable use of finite resources such as water and food and ecological systems, but also enhancing the prosperity and reducing inequalities by empowering people through modern energy access, creating jobs, but more importantly, also that all are part of this equation, including the private sector, and ensuring as well to benefit from the digitalization while maximizing also the human potential. Among our recommendations, we believe that also we come up that enable transformation change by promoting systemic approaches in the energy transition for the achieving the SDGs and climate goal while ensuring energy security. This comes through pillars of work, starting by the long-term vision that's to be integrated from the planning, cross-sector coordination, the participatory and inclusive governance mechanism across the institutions. The education is key for our future generation, but more importantly, reskilling, training, capacity building, and promotion of consumer behavior all should contribute together with data information and obviously the technology needed and innovation. Part of these recommendations come up under the other group of work that they will highlight that. But we think also that in our group, even though it will be addressed in other groups, is to focus on the finance for those who need it, to be aligned with the needs, specifically on those left behind, but more importantly, to have customized financial instruments such as for women in rural communities. And among our recommendations is to ensure that the energy transition is sustainably designed and implemented to enhance synergies and reduce trade-off with other SDGs. It's essential to design, enforce, and monitor adequate sustainable standards to avoid potential conflict between energy, services, and other development goals. And that's That's why we come up with certain specific indicators between the sectors that we need to monitor and ensure the principle of, as well, of synergy, but more importantly, the circular economy are embedded across different sectors. And it goes without saying that one of the key elements that our stakeholder emphasize is to ensure that to strengthen the multi-stakeholder partnership and to leverage the energy transformation potential for enabling the SDGs. People are the center, certainly, but we need to ensure that the decentralization of the governance, the engagement at the municipality, community level, as highlighted by the representative of the indigenous people, for example, and obviously we ensure that the SDGs and the plan that we are suggesting here need to be really designed and implemented at the municipality level and community level, national level, sub-regional and regional, and obviously all contribute to the global agenda. And obviously, one of the elements that come as a cross-cutting in our work, I would not focus as much on the priority of energy access for those who need it, but I finish with accelerating the integration of gender equity into the energy transition through the gender transformative approaches that should be integrated with all energy transition plan to close the gender gap across all the sectors, across all the level of empowerment from the policy design till implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Radia, for also sharing the key takeaways from the technical working group. And I will move straight to our panelists for this session on enabling SDGs through inclusive, just energy transitions. So our first speaker is Ms. Soma Dutta, who is the Senior Technical Advisor at Energia and an expert on the intersection between gender and sustainable energy. Ms. Dutta, over to you.
Greetings to everyone. And on behalf of Energia, thank you for having us participate in the high-level dialogue and also for this opportunity to present our views. In making our inputs today, I would like to acknowledge the inputs of colleagues from SEWA, from CELCO, UNDP, UNEP, WRI, and Sanmoksha India. So coming now to the points of discussion, perhaps the biggest challenge today is that while the energy access gap has been closing, the progress has largely been limited to basic energy services and has been uneven. And in terms of at all levels, whether it is rural, urban, whether it is men, women, whether it is remote geographies, all of this. And all of these disparities are even being heightened actually by COVID-19. So including the disproportionate impact on women that we're seeing in terms of they're having to cope with additional burdens of care, additional burdens of education, having to sustain families with lower incomes, not having mobile phones and hence not having access to internet that's necessary, etc. COVID-19, in fact, is known to push as many as 47 million women and girls into extreme poverty this year alone. So that's a big disparity that we're dealing with, and that's the biggest challenge. The other area that requires that calls for a change in the way we view and track energy sector is that the approaches in the various sectors is still very siloed, and in that the potential multiplier gains are being lost. So for SDG 7, most countries are tracking in a very binary form. The data is not disaggregated by sex. We don't know which section is getting access, which not, to what extent energy service is being used, for what purpose. All of those questions are rather a big black box right now. Even where data is available, it's scattered, and it often has limited comparability with other data sets. So moving forward, it's I think the first thing is to break these silos and it's really the governments that need to be doing that are in a driving position, driver's seat to be able to do that. Clearly, SDG 7 must be seen as a catalyst for the poor to innovate, as a catalyst for them to pull themselves out of poverty, as a catalyst to have high quality and well-energized infrastructure services. So SDG 7 investments should be seen to energize mills, threshers, cold storage facilities, dryers, as well as support business models that are actually enabling the poor to adopt these models. And for all of these to happen, we really need to break the silos that exist between ministries, between private sector and government, between civil society and private sector, all of those. So, So that's really actually our first recommendation. Related to this is our recommendation on data and information. And again, so the data that can support this kind of interventions really has to be disaggregated. It has to go beyond binary matrix. It has to capture use and impacts of energy access. And for this, we need to obviously work at various levels, including with the National Bureaus of Statistics. And finally, coming from energy, I will definitely say that gender equality and women's empowerment needs to be at the very center of energy access strategy and development strategy. And we are actually grateful for the emphasis that we already see in the technical working groups, including that of ours. And some opportunities for doing these are, first is a very targeted approach to gender in the national COVID recovery packages for the energy sector. The second is to promote women's energy entrepreneurship as a central strategy to energy access, especially to reach areas and locations that are unserved. In multiple countries and in multiple organizations, we are seeing women taking a strong role, but it really has to be scaled up. And in this connection, actually, mini-grids and off-grid solar systems provide an excellent opportunity that really must be tapped.
Ms.
Finally,
sorry, if you could wrap up. Thank you.
Last sentence. So, and finally, we also recommend that gender criteria must be considered central to the various funding windows that are there at the various levels by incentivizing private companies and MFIs, for example, to collaborate and to provide energy services and financing options that are tailored to men's and women's needs and businesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Duda, for those very important remarks. Colleagues, we are running a little bit late, so I'll need to be a little bit strong on the time. And let me move now to Dr. Alison Halford. He is Research Fellow at the Center of Data Science at Coventry University. Dr. Halford, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. So the HEED project, or the Humanitarian Engineering and Energy for Displacement project, really looked at understanding the needs of displaced people's aspirations about energy. And what we wanted to do was hear their voice and pilot from that community co-designed energy interventions. So what are the three challenges that that the communities identified themselves in having a more just and inclusive energy transition? And first and foremost, despite the growing use of solar interventions in refugee camps, long-term sustainability was an issue. And they were concerned about how they would maintain these systems. And they identified there was a lack of investment and political impetus for refugees, camp-based refugees, obtaining the skills and training on new technologies to maintain the systems. The second area that they expressed concern about and was continual was they felt particularly this idea of improved lighting and cook stoves was seen as a woman's problem. And these discussions about energy and gender in the displaced settings have at times essentialized refugees women. Similarly, by framing the women girls as passive rather than gentle in the design and production of energy solutions have further exacerbated that gender divide. And the third area was that humanitarian agencies have centered on short-term energy solutions, which position refugee camps as temporary structures. Yet the average time of refugees in Rwanda, where we were working, was 18 years. Therefore, we found that community ownership of energy systems and the sharing of benefits between refugee camps and community host communities was not currently the norm. So what are some of the measures that we put in that evolved from working with communities and then when we piloted these interventions? Well, there was three very positive. First and foremost, in tandem with the right of work, we found having energy gatekeepers in the community helped refugees engage with new energy technologies, along with private sector partnerships that delivered training. When COVID-19 came and the camps were in lockdown, refugees that we had trained were able to do simple repairs and be able to maintain the systems until the lockdown was lifted. The second issue measure that we would suggest is that there is more comprehensive packages of support for women to engage them in apprenticeships, not just providing finance for being a supplier or business, but actually putting them right in the center of designing energy systems. And lastly, which I think you will hear in many speak about, we need more data. We need data to develop alternative ownership models. And by being evidential, we will build robust demand patterns that will support these design systems, but also identify the role of the community has in managing those systems so that we set them up for success. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Halford, for those reflections and for bringing also that perspective from the humanitarian side as well. That's super important. Let me move to our next panelist, Ms. Charlotte Hagman. She is the research lead for climate and energy benchmark at the World Benchmarking Alliance. Ms. Hagman, please, you have the floor in 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting us to speak at this dialogue today. The 3 main challenges we see at the World Benchmarking Alliance for really enabling the low carbon transition to maximize positive impacts on other SDGs are firstly, the need for more corporate awareness. Secondly, the need for more corporate accountability. And thirdly, more coordinated and collaborative efforts. So we see that more corporate awareness is needed, both of the role and of the responsibility of businesses to support a just transition. This includes in terms of understanding the transformative potential and business opportunity of a just transition. A just transition really recognizes the need for equality, with the SDG mandate to leave no one behind at its heart, as well as equity, to ensure that the low carbon transition really supports, benefits, and empowers the workers, communities, and those most vulnerable to the impacts of the necessary decarbonisation and energy transformation. The just transition really encourages us all to look at shifting to cleaner and more sustainable energy as a leverage point at the intersection of the various SDGs. SDG 7 is not the only end goal. A thriving workforce and community will be central to ensuring true transformation. One of the leading energy companies we assess in our benchmark understands its contributions quite well to SDG 7 in generating and providing clean, low carbon energy. But it is still developing its understanding more fully of the opportunity of considering the intersection of SDG 7 with others like SDGs 8 and 3. For example, in building a wind farm, the company's focus is not just going to be on providing the turbines and the electricity supply those turbines create, but also the green and decent jobs this creates, the social protections the company contributes, and its role in funding education so that a low carbon workforce and supported community is there. So we see therefore the need for more corporate accountability in this area, and a lack of corporate awareness and attention on the just transition leads to limited information on what companies are doing. Stakeholders are currently in the dark on the influence and impact of companies, therefore lacking an accountability mechanism to better negotiate with and understand the role of business in a just transition. So this goes to our third challenge, where there is more consistency.
Ms. Hagman, would you mind wrapping up, please?
Of course, I'll finish on this third point, where more consistency and collaborative efforts are needed. So we need to see real tripartite social dialogue between employers, workers, and governments to create just transition plans that are fair and equitable. And I'll finish up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hagman, and apologies for
no problem.
that. I'll move to our last speaker of this segment, Mr. Mohammed Tariq Malik. He's architect and lecturer at the Sekos University, Peshawar. Mr. Tariq, please, you have the floor and 3 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this wonderful debate. As an architect, I believe that we should also focus on the conserving energy along with producing energy. So to me, three challenges are, the first one is government pays less attention to the design of commercial buildings, which are monsters of the energy consumption in area. The second one is the no integration of renewable energy technologies in existing buildings or its connection with our built environment. Like on average, 1 megawatt of wind capacity requires 100 tons of stainless steel, 402 tons of concrete, 6.8 tons of fiberglass, 3 tons of copper, and 20 tons of cast iron. So this is another problem in response of the to the existing problems rather than a solution. And the third one is the lack of adaptation to the passive strategies in buildings for cooling and heating, so that we need less energy. To address these challenges, some recommendations are, the first one is cities should have a separate body for the approval of green building design and strategies. So the architect also must submit energy calculation sheets with their design. For this, architect needs first to be trained in LEED and in SDGs, energy flows in buildings. For example, in Peshawar, where I am living, there are more than 25 architects practicing right now, but no one is the lead member, or no one knows the energy flows in the buildings. So this can be done through workshops, and when it is done, so we can achieve the SDG 3, which is health and well-being of occupants. This can be achieved by thermal comfort, passive cooling, and natural light in building. SDG 9, innovation in building and building product. SDG 11, by designing better cities, and SDG 13, by lowering carbon emissions. The second one is policies for integrating renewable technologies in our built environment, which will lower the resource consumption. So SDG 12 will be achieved, and setting sustainable design targets. For example, Architecture 2030, which is initiated by US in 2003 and has a chief goal of net zero energy and net zero carbon buildings by the 2030, thus achieving SDG 3, 9, 11, 12, and 13. And the last one is encouraging local resources and construction techniques in an area by the government, or give incentives to the developers for green or zero energy buildings, which can be done by devising policies. Green buildings result in energy saving of 40 to 50%, and water saving, like SDG 6, water saving of 20 to 30% compared to conventional buildings worldwide. So we must think, we must link, we must connect SDG 7, and 11. Without their sync activities, very lower and slow results can be achieved. Integrating of the renewable energy technologies with the built environment. For this, I mean the Bahrain World Trade Center is the best example, where 3 turbines produce energy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malik. Colleagues, I'll do the round of the 15 seconds, and it will be really 15 seconds on, and I apologize, we won't be able to have our screen break. But let me go back to Ms. Radia. If you could give your 15 seconds, your one message for September, what would that be?
I would just say that our future generation well-being rests on our decision today. Honestly, that the stream of this transition is really needed to really be accelerated to advance the human prosperity. And I would like to call for policymakers, stakeholders, really to take also the energy compact seriously in order to ensure that 2021 is the real year for energy action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Radia, for joining us today and for the messages. Ms. Tuta, over to you, 15 seconds.
Yes, in these 15 seconds, I would like to root for an accountability framework for the energy sector that is absolutely directly linked with improvements in people's lives through poverty reduction, improvements in health, education, gender equality, and environment.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Tuta. Dr. Hawford. That's for you.
Yes, certainly. I'd like to see more data in the hands of communities so that they can make informed decisions and be part of the process before, during and after any kind of energy projects implemented.
Thank you so much, Dr. Halford. Ms. Hudman.
Thank you so much. I think our main recommendation is really this collaborative and joined up thinking, facing in the same direction. This begins really with companies raising their own awareness and linking the social impacts with their low carbon offerings. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Hugman. Mr. Malik? Not sure if he's still with us, Mr.
Yeah, we should focus on the energy conservation more than the energy producing, and unless we pay attention to our commercial buildings, I think very little can be achieved. And the architect should design building in such a way that the elevation of that building produce energy, so that the building produce all its sustainable and renewable energy as it needs on the site, rather than incorporated from some other source. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malik, and many thanks to all the panelists for the theme number 3. Colleagues, as I mentioned, we won't be able to have a screen break because we are really, we need to move that slide because we're really running late. I promise we can try to put some of the bossa nova music we had when we closed the session today. And I hope my colleagues from the session number 4 are ready. We are now moving to discuss innovation, technology, and data. And I want to invite one of the co-leads of the technical working group, Ms. Rana Gonain, Chief of the Energy Systems and Infrastructure Division at UNIDO. So you can deliver your remarks. Ms. Gonain, the floor is yours, please.
Great. Thanks, Nayara, to you and also to the Secretariat for inviting us for this meeting. And it's my pleasure to represent the co-leads of Track 4 on technology, innovation, and data in this dialogue. We had a very interesting process of cooperation, both with the co-leads, with the champion countries, and also with the various members of the working group. And we were also quite lucky to have had within the process of our deliberations, 2 really very important reports coming out from IEA and IRENA as well on the net zero technologies that are and roadmaps that are out there. So this has been very informative to our report, and I just would like to share perhaps first some of the main considerations that we have taken, and also some of the main recommendations of the report. So to start with, I think we all agree that we do have a lot of the technologies that are there to actually help us meet our 2030 goals. What is needed actually is more support to innovations, particularly in end-use sectors, including industries. And so this is where a bit of the focus of the report is on the demand and the end-use sectors. We do recognize that innovation is also a dynamic process, and that is influenced by many stakeholders. And so when we talk about innovation and the need to support more innovation, we also advocate for more homegrown innovations that also do take into account the context of various countries and regions, and also helping and driving more jobs in the energy sector. Also, innovation is not only innovation in technology, it's also innovation in policy, social innovation, and also financial innovation. And that's where we see that innovations in policy really helped a lot in promoting, for example, or bringing stronger figures on the deployment of solar in the power sector, for example, and also where financial innovation helped a lot across Africa on the energy access side. So we do recognize innovation is not only meant to be technology innovation, but also broader than that. And then I think one point that I also heard across in the various themes, and I'm very happy actually to hear that, I heard data, data, and data. So that's fantastic to see that there's this cross-cutting theme coming across also from the various tracks. And so we're also looking at how to improve data systems, also to support the achievement of the SDGs and also our net zero goals for 2050. Finally, one of the considerations is also digitalization, and how digitalization can really play a critical role in enabling this transition. So I'll come now to the recommendations. So with this context in mind, what are the main recommendations of the working group? To start with, as we see also a bit of fragmentation in policies, being NDCs, innovation policies, industrial policies, energy policies. So what we are advocating for is actually stronger and more ambitious policies, but also an aligned policy ambition across these different policies coming out at national level. At the same time, since we do have a lot of the technologies that are needed to achieve the SDG targets, we are also advocating for more funding and support to commercialize some of these technologies and bring more meaningful demonstrations that can help in the scale that is needed to achieve the SDG targets. We're also advocating for an increase in the budget and support towards innovation. In order for us to actually also achieve the SDGs. On the other side, one of the third recommendation we have is actually more working on raising demand. And so this is where, we need to work more on creating markets that do favor sustainable energy technologies and help actually with the energy transition. So there are various, of course, details into these recommendations. So just as an example, green procurement policies, both by public and private sectors, could be also a very good lever for stimulating demand for the clean and sustainable energy technologies. The fourth recommendation is on leveraging digitalization for innovation, but while doing so, we obviously need to make sure that we address the digital divide. I think this is a very clear issue that we need to make sure that we also work on addressing the capacities and the skills of people in areas where digital technologies are not necessarily present, but also to improve the digital infrastructure in order to improve and leverage the digitalization.
Ms. Gonai, would you mind?
I'm getting to my final recommendation. Oh, I'm not my final recommendation, but the report's final recommendation, which is actually working on improving the collection, management, and application of data systems. And that's where, again, we see that digital technologies and application of digital technologies can help us in making data more readily available. I've said all that, but just to say also that one thing in the recommendations is that we are always underlying, obviously, the issue of leaving no one behind, and that's critical when we talk about technology and innovation. And really, there's a huge potential for creating jobs in these sectors. So we should make sure that we do that while leaving no one behind. Thank you. So I'll stop here and pass over back to you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Gonai, and for sharing those important and reflecting on the recommendations from the technical working group. And I'll move straight to our panel. My first guest is Mr. Jose Ramon Lopez, the International Project Manager at Ente Vasco de la Energía. Mr. Lopez, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for your kind presentation and for the invitation to participate in this workshop. I will go straight to the challenges. From the supply side, we need to develop affordable, cost-effective, and resource-efficient technology solutions to decarbonize the energy supply system in a competitive and sustainable way. We cannot forget the demand side. I should say demand side is the most important side of this. The cleanest form of energy is the energy that is not used. So we have to focus on energy efficient solutions for buildings, industry, heating and cooling systems, SMEs and energy related products and services, integration of information and communication technology, and cooperation with the telecommunication sector. In many instances, the technologies already exist, but they need support to be implemented, to enter the market and demonstrate their performance, reduce costs, and create economies of scale that favors a massive deployment. As for the measures, develop smart specialization strategies at regional level. I think it's an important one. These strategies should put emphasis on research and innovation, taking into account the capacities, strengths, and resources at local level, focusing in a few globally competitive areas. Then we can talk about the need for public support for clean energy research, development, and innovation. We can use different tools like grants, subsidies, tax exemptions, clean energy public procurement, etc. What is very important is that the coordination between the different levels of the administration is a key. And also we have to highlight international cooperation. And I would like to end with promotion of research infrastructures that link the different capacities and expertise at the local and regional level. One infrastructure can be used by many technology developers, while other forms of help, like subsidies, might only reach to a few. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Lopez, for your input. I'll move straight to our next speaker, Dr. Nanda Kumar Janardanan, Senior Policy Specialist at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. Dr. Janardanan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadia, and good evening from Japan. On behalf of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, I wish to thank DESA for this opportunity to speak. My intervention focuses on the role of technology collaboration in supporting the global community to achieve net zero goals by 2050 as well as SDG 7. The conventional technology transfer frameworks often fail to realize their potential because they limit end-user contributions to technology design and development. In thinking about enhancing technology collaboration, the concept of co-innovation merits attention. Co-innovation is an iterative and mutually beneficial approach to jointly conceiving, manufacturing, and scaling up sustainable technologies between countries that have advanced technologies and countries that are in need of the same. I'll underline 3 ways co-innovation can help overcome hurdles to conventional technology transfer and help us put on a climate-neutral path. First, technologies or finished products shared through conventional technology transfer is often unaffordable for recipient countries. By focusing on co-innovation, there can be greater emphasis on benefits, including local jobs, reduced pollution, shared capabilities, and possibly carbon credits. Second, imported technologies may not always fit well in the recipient country context. By focusing on co-innovation and learning in the recipient country, hardware and software can be adapted to local contexts and needs. Third, conventional technology transfer can adversely affect the recipient country's domestic industries and local economies. By focusing on co-innovation, developing country industries can participate in the learning process and identify opportunities for scaling up. Importantly, each of the above 3 points can accelerate and scale up technology collaboration, putting the world on a carbon neutral path. The next step is making co-innovation actionable, scalable, and replicable. At IGES, we are working on specifying how co-innovation be put into action in areas such as hydrogen technology. We look forward to discussing with you how we can collectively move co-innovation forward in the SDG 7 and other relevant discussions on the road to COP26. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Janardanan, for your remarks. And let me move to our final speaker for this session, Mr. Faisal Al-Fadel. He's Secretary General of the Saudi Green Building Forum. Mr. Al-Fadel, you have the floor, please.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. First of all, thank you to DESA for the invite and the Secretary to invite us. Really, my interception, really looking into things, are more of a principle-based methodologies and applications. There is no doubt that financial systems, investment, innovations for new technologies are becoming the focus of theme, really, the across theme to all the other, whether it's energy access or the energy foundations or infrastructures or what have you, from things that needs to be done. Now, we classified it into the principles into three sectors, which is financial systems, the capacity building for the NGOs, institutions with quality data collection for SDG 7. Now, also the principle of acceleration of contribution to combating climate change. There is no doubt that energy in concept that intersect with all the interlinkage of all the SDG 17s. Now, have said that on the principle side, now on the methodology side, it's really fundamental that we support and fund the scientific-based policy for which that we can really encourage governments and private sector really to move forward in that direction in methodologies. And I really like what everybody is saying on the transition. Transition is really the methodology for which that we can actually engage everyone collectively to move forward. Now, also promoting building blocks, green recovery, also learning from the COVID-19, it's all about data. And I'm also with my other colleagues, very happy that data becomes really the central focus for everybody's. Now, also catalyzing multi-stakeholders partnership and volunteers are really, really essential to energy. Now, energy, you can look at it also in methodology as to be energizing the 17 goals with energy. Energy by itself, it has no meaning. Only the meaning brings in when the 17 goals are in play. Now, as an example and applications, we as a foundation, as an NGO, locally, we try to make sure that data is actually collected well from the community. And no matter how intelligent our future with the data, it really becomes the experience of the human collector of this data. So there's no doubt humanity in data, it becomes very, very important. As also in concluding, I would like to say that data in the hands of the community, as one of my colleagues pointed out, that data for the community, by the community, for the community. And thank you so much for giving us the opportunity, and I look forward to further engage with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Afadal. I'll go with the 15 seconds with this group as well. I'll start with Ms. Rana Gonain from UNIDO. Your 15 seconds, your message for the September high-level dialogue on energy.
Great, thanks. So I would say set an ambitious and aligned vision. That's something obviously very clearly coming out from our recommendations. Act locally, so consider the customized needs for innovations at a local level, and leave no one behind. So make sure that we consider the diversity needs of different groups and make sure to look at that while considering the energy transition.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Rana. Mr. Lopez?
Well, I would like to add or to say again that coordination at different levels and cooperation with other countries and regions are key to create innovation ecosystems. And I would like to highlight that we should always have in mind that energy efficiency should always be considered the first option.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Lopez. Dr. Janardanan?
Thank you. I think a fundamental change is needed in the way technology transfer has been happening. It should be participatory. This is why we are recommending co-innovation, where both source and recipient countries jointly conceptualize, develop, and scale up sustainable technologies. This will also help address the inherent challenges and limitations of conventional technology transfer. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Janardanan. Mr. Alfadal?
Yes, of course. I put my voice with everyone. I think solidarity of our regional and urban cities are very essential to the energy. It has to be a local specific so we can address the issues in a proper way. And also the value change or the value chain that for which that really brings green economy all together at one space. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Alfadel, and to all the panelists of the theme number 4. I know we are running late, and I really am grateful for all of you for attending this long session, but we have now a very key topic as well to discuss. It's finance and investment. And let me start right away by giving the floor to one of the co-leads of the Technical Working Group on Finance and Investment, Mr. Emmanuel Adekoye, who serves as Senior Economist at the European Investment Bank. Mr. Adekoye, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. So I don't know what happened to the background, but apparently it's turned the other way around. That doesn't matter. So the UN Secretariat invited the European Investment Bank as the European Union Climate Bank to work with other co-lead organizations, the International Energy Agency, the International Finance Corporation, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa to produce a technical theme report on energy, finance, and investment. As we were finalizing the report, the IEA published a very important report on net zero, concluding that we will need to triple investment in clean energy by 2030 in order to meet net zero by 2050. And this is a bit the starting point of our work. So we identified a number of recommendations, 9 in total. I don't have time to go through it. So I will present the 4 key challenges and associated priority results that we have identified. The first one is to ensure an inclusive and sustainable recovery and financial resources mobilization for developing markets. So COVID-19 recovery programs offer a huge opportunity to stimulate economic activity by focusing on SDG 7 and clean energy investment. However, we know that several assessments suggest that the amount allocated to greening the recovery remain well short of what is required. So the report urges countries to use the COVID-19 recovery strategies to boost investment in sustainable energy worldwide, including, and this is important, increase support to developing countries that have limited resources and limited fiscal space to achieve SDG 7 by 2030. The second priority is to make finance flows congruent with global energy goals by 2030 and net zero by 2050, and also increasingly reward ambitious climate strategies. So we know that the momentum on sustainable finance is growing. The demand for sustainable assets such as green bonds is increasing. Harmonized definitions of green assets, such as a taxonomy for sustainable activities, will help to improve the availability of data for financial decision-making with robust and transparent framework. We also need, where feasible, to mandate the disclosure of energy transition strategies and climate risks by energy companies. Another recommendation is to get the prices right. Subsidies to fossil fuels that are not targeted and encourage wasteful consumption have to be stopped. We also need to put a meaningful and predictable price on carbon, either directly or indirectly, which remains a critical element of the policy response. A further recommendation of the report is to make the finance sector align with the objectives of the Paris Agreement, what we call the Paris alignment, recognizing, of course, the right to sustainable development for all countries. In particular, and it's very clear in the IEA report published last week, reaching net zero targets implies phasing out as soon as possible financing new energy projects reliant on unabated fossil fuels. So financial institutions are invited to commit to dates to stop financing such new projects. The third priority is related to local markets for sustainable finance that need to be developed, and local intermediaries need to be strengthened. Many local capital markets for sustainable finance remain weak or even inexistent in some cases. And so when you sign a clean energy project in hard currency, while the revenues received are in local currencies, this creates a currency risk for many developing countries. So the technical report recommends to enhance local currency funding and support the deepening of domestic capital markets to achieve SDG 7. The fourth and last priority result is that there is a need to build a robust pipeline of de-risked clean energy projects. Despite high demand for green assets in some regions, there remains a shortage of supply of bankable energy projects. So there is a mismatch, in fact, between the source of funding available and the risk profile of sustainable energy investment. And we know that higher risks increase cost and contribute to curbing investment appetite. So engendering and attracting private sector finance will require an enabling investment environment, clear risk allocation framework, and system level planning. And there are successful examples, for instance, in many countries with the creation of renewable energy zones that can de-risk investments. In order to maximize
Mr. Barito,
yeah.
Would you mind wrapping up? Thank you.
Yeah.
Apologies for
one
that.
of the key recommendations, and this is my last point of the report, is to make better use of blended finance schemes, which is a blend of commercial lending with grants, technical assistance, concessional loans, and guarantees. So the report highlights, in particular, first loss piece guarantees on the portfolio of projects as an interesting tool. So I will stop there. So this short introduction provides a very short overview, and I invite you to read the report. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Barito, and apologies for having to intervene. I will invite our speakers now on finance and investment. And we have 4 speakers, and I'll be counting on them, their capacity of being concise. The first one is Mr. Miguel Munoz. He's the head of the Climate Policies and Alliances at Iberdrola. Mr. Munoz, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me to join this interesting panel. Regarding the challenges to mobilize the level of investment needed to meet SDG 7 and climate neutrality, I think there are 3 important challenges. The first one is that climate energy targets and SDGs and regulatory frameworks are not always aligned. There are especially important challenges in carbon pricing. Carbon pricing schemes sometimes are not robust enough. There is a huge amount of fossil fuel subsidies in place in several jurisdictions. And it's important also to reinforce some regulatory frameworks in the field of infrastructure or also fiscal incentives. The second challenge, there are important fiscal constraints, liquidity challenges, political priorities are not always aligned with these targets. This challenge is especially important in the current situation when green recovery packages are being developed. The third challenge is that low carbon investments, as you are fully aware, tend to have higher upfront capital cost intensity, and sometimes in context with where there are some kind of risk perception, regulatory uncertainties, etc., this challenge is important. So it will be especially remarkable the need of the risking tools in this field of challenges. Taking into account these challenges, the measures, I will be very concise. There are 3 action streams that should be fostered. The first one is to tackle an ambitious approach toward SDGs and climate goals. This is especially important. For me, it will be remarkable the need of intermediate targets regarding climate to meet the climate neutrality path. Also, to reinforce collaboration, the stakeholder collaboration between different actors, governments, companies, NGOs, etc. The second package of measures is related to enabling policy environments to accelerate green investments. We need a stable and robust regulatory frameworks if we want to attract investment. There is also a need of a smooth and streamlined administrative procedures, especially in the permitting processes, if we want to get the speed, the necessary speed to meet goals. Public-private collaboration, as I have mentioned, is very important also. In the electricity field, it will be especially remarkable the need of fine-tune electricity market design. We will face an electricity market with a very big share of renewables. So the design of the electricity market will be crucial. Also, of course, incentives, funds for R&D in net zero technologies. And the last recommendation is related to a cross-cutting issue, very important, carbon price signal and taxation. There should be reforms to align taxation with the polluter pays principle, and all the energies should internalize their carbon footprint and also different externalities, the elimination of fossil fuel subsidies, of course, always taking into account the just transition aspect, but we should work on this line. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Munoz. And colleagues, we will be going a little longer because we will be covering all the program today. And let me invite Ms. Tara Caetano. She's the Senior Professional Officer at ICLEI in Africa. Ms. Caetano, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you so much for the Secretariat for the invitation to speak at this critical forum. I am coming in from a slightly different perspective. I think there's been quite a lot that's been said about the need to be inclusive and the need to create enabling frameworks and also to allow investments to flow to communities. And I think there's a gap for me that I think would be useful to fill, and it's also that of the local government. So the role of the local governments in all of this. So my challenges relate to the role of local governments and the challenges that they find within this critical financing space. So how really where do local governments fit in terms of mobilizing and leveraging public and private finance to achieve SDG 7 and also carbon neutrality? What we're finding is on the ground, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where I spend most of my time working through the Covenant of Mayors in sub-Saharan Africa, we find that there's a lack of capacity and knowledge on exactly how to leverage public and private finance. And this exists at all levels of government, not just at the local level, but in terms of where that capacity is, the need is most dire, we find it really at the local level. My second challenge that I'd like to mention is the inability for African cities and local governments to receive investment directly without it needing to go through or be approved by national governments. And this is the need for not only blended finance, which was mentioned, but also special purpose vehicles to really allow the finance to flow to the local level. The third challenge that we find is that there is an enormous length of time that passes between the approval of international finance and funding, and when there's actually the funding that really hits the ground and is awarded to the city and national governments. And I think this is a critical challenge, particularly if we're looking to really increase our ambition and address the needs of SDG 7 and achieving carbon neutrality. 3 concrete measures and recommendations with regard to these challenges that I would like to put forward.
Ms. Caetano, can you wrap up, please?
Yes, sure. So just my 3 recommendations, just in very quick summary. 1 relates to national governments and the need for national governments to consider creating an enabling environment for the finance to flow to the local level. The second one is to work with initiatives such as the Covenant of Mayors and with city networks such as ICLEI Africa to really focus on upskilling local governments and in terms of how to leverage finance. And the third one is around finding and focusing on finding solutions to decreasing the current inefficiencies of international climate finance. I think this needs to be considered and tabled, especially as we lead to COP at the end of this year. I'll wrap up there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Caetano. I'll move straight to our next speaker, Ms. Andrea Vieira Romero. She's a PhD candidate in the environmental science at the State University of New York. Ms. Vieira, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Nayara. A pleasure to be part of this panel. Well, my contributions today are based on preliminary findings from my dissertation that examines industry perspectives on sustainability in the electricity generation sector in my home country, in Ecuador. Regarding the challenges, I can tell you that reduced government spending is a constant limitation to the transition. It reduces government priorities. This was a pattern that already existed but has intensified with the pandemic. So it's pushing aside long-term plans toward expansion and renovation of the national grid. From the private sector, there are businesses engaged in the clean development mechanisms, for example, sugarcane plantations that generate electricity from biomass. But their initial motivation has declined along with the carbon prices from the emissions reduction certificates. This is not their main business unit, so sugarcane producers, for example, are now thinking about divesting from these projects. That is something to consider. One other challenge is incomplete or outdated regulatory frameworks. They are not usually aligned with long-term national goals in terms of energy transition, and that discourages further investment. The legislative reforms is also usually slow. What can governments and stakeholders do in order to address this? Well, one first measure is that to consider that international cooperation is required, very important to provide the funds, not only like the traditional multilateral organizations, but also start initiatives from regional cooperation, South-South cooperation. A second measure to consider is there's a need to make the continuity of the clean development mechanism projects based on the low return that they're providing with the carbon prices. So an overall assessment is needed for both developed and developing countries. And finally, I would like to say that the role of the government needs to be revitalized. If we look to developing countries, state-owned enterprises, they are the ones that lead the electricity sector. So whatever choices they make are critical if we want to expand the financing of the clean energy goals. And I'll finish there.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Vieira, for those inputs. And finally, our last panelist for this, the whole webinar is Ms. Anahita Hosseini. She is representing the Children and Youth Major Group. Thank you. Oh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nayara. Hello, everyone. This is Anahita Hosseini, and it is a true honor to be a part of this debate. I would like to highlight that I am speaking in my personal capacity, and I do not represent the organization that I work for. Overall, I would say the transition to sustainable and renewable energy is a public good. The environmental benefits are for all, not just for those who have paid the costs, therefore it's not excludable. Also, one person benefiting from the transition to sustainable energy does not prevent another person from benefiting. Therefore, it's not competitive. And that's the economic definition of public good. Now, like any other public good, the issue of investments and financing remains a challenge. In my opinion, the three main challenges for mobilization of investments are lack of financial incentive, high risk of investment, and lack of information about investment options and returns and results. Now, on lack of financial incentive, in some countries, there are no benefits of investing in renewable energy, no tax cuts, no carbon credits for carbon pricing in place. There are still subsidies for fossil fuels in place, and the investors in renewable energy might even lose money because of the taxation system. This framework is not exactly encouraging SDG 7 financing. On high risk of investment, by nature, it takes a very long time to get returns on investment in early stage renewable energy businesses. Also, sometimes given the conflict of interest and uncertainty about the prices, buyout of energy, and tax regulations for energy, there's so much uncertainty involved with the future of investments and returns. This increases the risk to reward for investors. And a lack of information, consolidated information about renewable energy investment options or green investment options, the social impact the investments can make, and the estimated financial returns are limited or not available to all. Also, in some countries, even if sustainable finance markets exist, many investors are not aware of them. Now, what can be done? Three main solutions could be alignment of regulations, active and regular promotion of sustainable energy financing options, as well as awareness raising and capacity building campaigns. On alignment of regulations, this could include tax regulations, carbon pricing and carbon credits, etc., and creating an enabling regulatory framework for SDG 7 targets and in general, climate targets, financing and investments. And on active and regular promotion of sustainable energy financing options, consolidated data sharing platforms and making available information and transparency on the options, green investment options for all could be a good solution. And on the importance of awareness raising, it is important to start awareness raising campaigns on the social impact of investments in renewable energy and sustainable energy, so that the importance and the impact of investments can become clearer for those less informed. Also, capacity building on leveraging public and private finance for the policymakers could be an incredibly key solution. I would like to thank you again for giving me the time and opportunity, and over to you, dear Nayara.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hosseini, for your remarks. We have then 1 minute of the key, 15 seconds round for your key message to the high-level dialogue on energy. And I'll start with Mr. Emmanuel Adekoye, if you're still with us and could also provide your key message.
Yeah, so I think the key message is that if we want to triple investment by 2030 to meet SDG 7, leave no one behind and be on track with net zero by 2050, there is a need to turn billion of public money into trillion of investment, and therefore to attract private capital. And for that, we need to scale up and make better use of blended finance schemes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adekoye. Mr. Miguel Munoz, your 15 seconds message.
Thank you. Robust and stable policy frameworks will be crucial to leverage the right level of investment that we need to meet goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Munoz. Stara Caetano.
Thank you so much. I think my overall key message is to acknowledge and to formalize the key role that the local level and local governments play in achieving SDG 7.
Thank you so much, Ms. Caetano. Ms. Andrea Vieira.
Yes, so I think the most important is to address like the role of the government to create the conditions to attract the capital and finance the energy transition. So anyone who takes office needs to recognize the importance of planning for the next 25, 50, or maybe 100 years, not only secure the next elections.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yera. And we'll finish with the Voice of the Children and Youth Major Group. Anahita Hosseini, the
Thank
floor is
you.
yours.
I would summarize with highlighting the importance of awareness raising regarding the social impact of SDG 7 financing and capacity building for policymakers on leveraging private and public finance. Thank you.
Thank you so very much to our panelists, to our partners, for all the participants for staying with us. We just have one more thing to go and actually our closing remarks. And it's my pleasure to invite Ms. Lotta Tahtinen. She's Chief of the Outreach and Partnerships Branch from the Division for Sustainable Development Goals at DESA. She's also my boss. Lotta, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nayara. Hello, panelists and distinguished participants. It has been such a pleasure to have all of you join us today in this wonderful exchange of views and to learn from stakeholders about the multiple initiatives that they are contributing to the implementation of SDG 7. We have had a large number of participants who have taken part, and thank you to also all of you who have shared your comments and views and questions in the chat box. We assure you that all those questions will be considered as we are preparing the summary of this webinar. Now, before we conclude, let me just make a few important announcements. Firstly, the registration for the Ministerial Thematic Forums, which will be held on 21st to 25th of June, is now open. These forums, as you know, are major milestones on the road to the high-level dialogue on energy in September this year, and they intend to bring together key stakeholders virtually to mobilize actions. Applications to host side events are also open through the 7th of June. So please do take a look at the relevant website and register. Secondly, please consider submitting your energy compact. These energy compacts are really important vehicles for stakeholders to increase the visibility of your leadership on SDG 7 and related development priorities such as climate, gender, food, and decent work. So please do register your energy compacts. And then finally, we would like to invite you to consult the Stakeholders Thematic E-Consultation summary, which was launched this morning and which is part of the inputs from stakeholders to the high-level debate on energy. This summary will also be made available to member states and other stakeholders in preparation for the high-level dialogue in September. All the relevant links will be posted in the chat box by my colleagues. Thank you again to everyone who took part in this most stimulating discussion, and this meeting is now ended.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Lotta. And see you, colleagues.